Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I just want to make sure that all of you understand one thing before we get started, and that is that Tom Brady is speaking in another room right now. Okay, thank you. It's very kind of you to have come to hear our panel, given the alternatives that you had.
They're not all leaving yet.
Someone said, "Oh, I thought it was the other room." We have a very distinguished panel, so you've made a very good decision. I'd like to start by introducing them. I'm going to start with the hardest names first. At my far right, to your left, is Jorge Paulo Lemon, the co-founder and board member of 3G Capital and a board member of Kraft Heinz, who has joined us today. He splits his time between Brazil and Switzerland. Welcome. Seated between us is Jim McCaughon, President, Global Asset Management, and CEO of Principal Global Advisors. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
At the other far end, two exceedingly easier names: Tim Sloan, the CEO and President of Wells Fargo and Company.
Adam, how are you?
Tim, good morning. I'm fine, thank you very much. And seated next to me is Julie Sweet, Chief Executive Officer for North America of Accenture.
Okay, Adam.
Welcome, Julie.
Thanks.
So we're going to discuss strategy and leadership in the age of disruption. An observation to kick us off is that successful organizations are those that can deftly turn changes in technology, culture, competition, and the workforce into profit. So think about those topics: technology, culture, competition, and workforce. I'm going to give everybody on the panel an opportunity to speak with also to speak with each other, to have a dialogue amongst ourselves. I'd like to include you in the dialogue as much as possible. I'll save some time at the end for audience Q&A. We have mics in the room, but I'll just tell you right now that if you feel that you absolutely can't wait to ask your questions, stand up and make yourself known to me. The lights are very bright, so I have to go like this to see you. So you're not generally here because you're shy people, so don't be shy. And I'm happy to bring you into the conversation sooner than the appointed Q&A time. Julie, I'd like to ask you to kick things off and frame the conversation for us. Strategy and leadership in an age of disruption. I know you spoke earlier on artificial intelligence. If you'd like to start there, I think that would be fine. Tell us what the challenge is that everybody on this panel and everybody in the room is facing right now.
Well, sure. Well, maybe just taking a step back, it's very common people talk about the fact that over half of the companies who were on the S&P in 2000 are no longer here. So that's sort of, and the view is that has been caused by digital disruption. But probably more important is to look at the pace of that change. So it took over 20 years for Amazon to really challenge the Walmarts of the world, right? It's only taken around 7 for Uber. And so the compression of the disruption in terms of how it's challenging industries and is going much faster. And then you think about the change in how we as individuals are operating and what that means for businesses. So just for fun, how many of you check your phone before you go to bed and before you get out of bed? Just a show of hands.
Oh, not the second, but okay.
Okay. So Pew Research says that 65% of Americans do so. And by the way, I'm not going to ask you this, but 3% sleep with their phone in their hand. So they don't miss anything. Okay.
So they what?
So they don't miss anything.
Yeah.
And the iPhone didn't exist 11 years ago. And so the disruption is not only what's happening in industries and through companies, it's also what's happening in terms of consumer expectations and employee expectations, and hence this idea of what does it mean for our leadership in this space. And we really see 3 macro trends. I'm going to get to artificial intelligence last. So
Sure.
First is this point around experience. As companies are looking to transform themselves across their enterprise, what they're dealing with is a very different level of expectations around experience, what an employees expect to experience, what their partners expect, and what their customers, which requires very different thinking. And so the idea of starting with the employee, we had a panel this morning where there was a lot of discussions around artificial intelligence, but the resistance of employees being the biggest piece of it. And so how you address expectations of employees and their fears and what they see as opportunities, and doing it at an experience level is a very important macro trend that's happening. The second is the need for innovation in large companies. So if you're born digital and you're challenging major industries, you are not looking at having to reskill or completely change your workforce. And that is probably the topic that we hear the most across the board from companies. What's interesting is that when we have that discussion, probably the biggest challenge is the recognition of the need to change the kind of leaders that you have. And that's probably when we look at the most successful companies who've really addressed disruption, they're usually much more willing to redefine what does it mean to lead, moving from it's about how many people you control to actually having an innovation mindset and being able to look at innovation as being critical. And so this need to innovate, every company we're working with today is having some experiment on how to innovate. It's the biggest struggle for particularly established companies. And then the final is in artificial intelligence. And we look at artificial intelligence much like the impact of electricity, right, in terms of how it's changing society and business, and then the knock-on effect of what it's enabling. And it's a huge opportunity. Our research shows that a Fortune 500 company could see an average of a 38% increase in revenue by 2022 if they put in place the best practices. But when you look at where we are, half of companies today are not embracing it. About a quarter are doing experiments, and then a quarter actually have something at scale. So there's a huge opportunity.
I just want to get you to elaborate on one thing, Julie, which is I'm fascinated by this electricity comparison. No company in the room, there are probably very few companies in the room that pay attention to their electricity strategy. Maybe once upon a time their companies or their predecessors would have. So I guess, and I'm going to do a quick audience poll, but talk more about to what extent business leaders need to personally understand their artificial intelligence strategy, where I think we would agree that they probably don't need to understand their electricity strategy.
True, because today it is taken for granted,
Yep.
right? We're at the beginning of understanding how artificial intelligence can impact every aspect of the business. So you look at technologies like blockchain, going to be very interesting, going to have a big impact, is not going to affect literally every industry and every function. And that's the difference. And so we believe that eventually artificial intelligence will not be something that you put over here as a proof of concept. It will be a tool like you're computing, right? The fact that no one questions today that you have to have a network, and now the question is, how do you get IT to the next level? But it is just a core function, and you're beginning to see it. 30 years ago when we started shared services, they were all about, finance, accounting, HR. Today, the conversation is shared services around analytics and artificial intelligence as a capability for the entire organization. And the best companies are doing that. And so it will become as ubiquitous as just simply another tool as many of the core functions you have today.
And so I'd like to see a quick show of hands, and correct me if I don't frame it correctly. I think you said that 50% of companies are doing, or some percentage are doing meaningful experiments.
A quarter are doing meaningful experiences, a quarter have things that are done at scale, and about half have not really started.
So what show of hands for if your companies are in the former category, either doing things at scale or doing meaningful experiments in artificial intelligence now? Yeah. Okay, so that's about 5% of the room, and then a show of hands if you personally are involved in those initiatives. Yeah, okay, well, it's a self-selecting group. It's about the same number of people. Good, huge opportunity on the subject of helping people come forward. Georgie, I'd like to turn to you if I could, please. The industries that you have invested in, that I'm most familiar with, are old line consumer-focused industries, beer, food. Talk about how those companies see innovation today, and how you have viewed innovation looking backwards as well over the past decades.
I'm a terrified dinosaur, especially after attending this meeting. I went to a food meeting yesterday, and all they talked about was new products and new forms of producing food. Then I go to the next meeting is on artificial intelligence, and everybody's talking a lot about data analytics and like that. And I've been living in this cozy world of old brands, big volumes, nothing changing very much, and you can just focus on being very efficient and you'll do okay. And all of a sudden, we're being disrupted in all ways. If you go to a supermarket, you see hundreds of new brands on the supermarket shelf. The client doesn't want to move out of his house anymore. He wants everything delivered to his house. In beer, we had the new kinds of beers coming in all over, like that. So we're being affected by everything, and what we're doing about it, we're running to adjust. Our companies have run sort of in their own way for a long time. So in beer, we have set up a totally separate department. It's called ZX, and it's supposed to deal with disruption and supposed to disrupt ourselves. And we have new people, different kind of people, younger people, more digital-minded, more data-minded, and like that. And we hope this will be a model which we can build on for our other companies. So so we're scrambling.
And would it be fair to say that in your career that this is a new paradigm, that you were able to do things basically one way for this period of time, and this is a market shift right now?
Very much so. We bought brands and we thought they would last forever. We borrowed a lot of cheap money because money was cheap. So that worked out very well, and then we simply managed what was there a little bit more efficiently. And now we have to totally adjust to new demands from clients which are a lot more fickle. They want a different product every day. They want it delivered in an easier form, like that. So we really have to adjust. There are big companies who are ahead of us in terms of being in a commodity business. And, just to name some, I think Starbucks is one, Nike is another one, Zara in Europe and like that. So there are people who are in a business like ours, which is traditional business, and which have adjusted. So we have to go in that direction.
So if I could disagree with you on something, you said you've managed these businesses a little more efficiently. I would think most people would agree you've managed them a lot more efficiently.
Well, I don't know. People criticize us for that also. So it's not only, not only.
In this room, I think it's an achievement. But to play devil's advocate, I could see someone making an argument that that you and your colleagues are not the people to manage this innovative change because that's not where your experience lies. How do you confront that or approach that?
I've had various careers in my life. I was a tennis player, a finance guy, went in, so I've been adjusting, and I'm 78, but I'm ready.
Very good.
And I'm scrambling. I'm not going to lie down and go away or like that. So.
Very good.
Yeah, I think that's worth applause. And just one quick question. I wanted to make sure I understood you. The companies you admire that you named are Starbucks, Nike, and Zara?
Yeah, I say they've done a better job than we're doing in terms of understanding what their clients want or what their consumers want and like that.
Can you buy any of them?
Well, I haven't thought about it. Don't think about it.
Very good, Jim. Let's come to you, please. Your thoughts on technology and disruption and leadership in general, and then we'll drill down.
Yes, since we've been talking about innovation, firstly, why do we have an AI strategy? Why do chief executives have to deal with technology and not with electricity? Well, I think it's about change. The opportunity set has changed a lot. If we were talking in about 1890, your electricity strategy would be very important because it was brand new and it was the thing that was revolutionizing business and putting people out of work, by the way. So this is not a new phenomenon. Probably the new phenomenon is the pace of technological change, the power that current technological implementation has to change jobs. And in order to exploit that possibility, we need to innovate. And that's pretty unfortunate for big businesses because culturally, big businesses don't innovate very well. So what can we do about it? It's not just cultural. When you look at a big business, innovation, firstly, it doesn't look important compared with a business that really makes the money. And then once it gets to be important, it looks threatening because it threatens to displace the business that's making the money. It's the Kodak syndrome, which is often talked about. By the time you're ready to replace the business, someone else has probably done it and disrupted you. And most industries are a bit like that at the moment. So how can big companies, how can big business innovate? I would suggest a large part of it is fragmentation. And to give you a couple of examples, in the asset management industry, we have the multi-boutique structure. Lots of little teams that are very focused and quite self-contained. You get a lot more innovation out of them than you do out of one big, somewhat bureaucratic group. Another example would be advertising. The most successful advertising agencies have modest-sized, defined creative teams and centralized media buying that forces costs down and gets the economies of scale. So in other words, be fragmented, be focused where it pays to do so, but be efficient and coordinated and singular about those shared services where it's advantageous to do so. I think that the leadership that's needed to get the right degree of fragmentation in the right places to keep people focused is actually one of the main challenges in leadership that we see in business right now.
So keep going, if you would, and talk about a little more specifically how technology is disrupting your business and what you're doing about it.
Yeah. Now, in our business, in asset management, the products and capabilities that you really wanted to have 20 years ago, you don't want anymore. I'm talking here about active large cap equities. You could run hundreds of billions of dollars on a fee of 40 or 50 basis points. That business is as gone as the buggy whip. Basically, that money now buys beta through index funds. And then the 40 or 50 basis points has become 20 or 30 because of passive competition, and it's headed down. So large liquid markets are not the perfect area to be in like they were before. The industry's been disrupted by the passive players, just as surely as retailing's being disrupted by Amazon. So what do you do about it? Well, our strategy is to go for less liquid markets, less efficient, less well-researched, private markets. Those are where you have the ability to add value for clients and also to get paid for it. Multi-asset strategies for an outcome. But I think any investment manager, to take our industry and stay close to home, any investment manager who can't articulate a strategy to combat this disruption is probably headed for oblivion.
Tim, I hate to suggest that that's a segue for.
There's no more to say.
Yeah.
It's not a segue to Tim. Come on.
But I do need to. But it is Tim's turn to speak. And first of all, in all seriousness, Wells Fargo obviously has a lot of challenges right now of the moment. And so thank you for being here and showing your face and representing in public. But you and we'll. No, it's a
Thank you, Adam. That was really
non-trivial
helpful.
thing.
That's great. Thanks. Great. Yeah.
With a setup like that.
I'm going to go
Tim.
see Tom Brady. Oh, quite.
Talk about your industry faces a ton of disruption. So let's start by talking how you're confronting that.
So let me put it in Wells Fargo perspective. So we were founded 166 years ago, and our business model was deliver people and packages by horse. Think about that. It got disrupted fairly quickly. We've been innovating for that entire period, and I would absolutely agree with one of the things that Julie said is the difference today is it's moving faster, and it's a bigger deal because it's happening to us. Right? The innovation of 10 and 15 years ago was nice, but it was happening to somebody else. We're the ones now that need to change, that need to lead, that need to think about competition in a different way. And so it just feels like it's more acute and a little bit more challenging. I don't really think it is. I think it creates an incredible opportunity because what it does, and whether you're talking about big data or artificial intelligence or machine learning or blockchain or whatever it is, they're just different ways in which we can provide more value to our customers. That's what it's all about. It's not about change for change's sake. Now, you could save a little money and things like that, but it's about listening to our customers and finding out what they want for those that sleep with their phones. So think about that, right? We introduced a product or a service in May of last year. It's called real-time balance alerts. Sounds pretty basic. We know all about your checking account at Wells Fargo, inflows and outflows. We say to our customers, let us know what balance you'd like to know about. Why do we do that? So you can manage your finances better. That makes sense, right? So when we rolled that out, right, it was slow, and now 20 million times a month, we have a new way to interact with our customers, providing them with the service that they didn't have before, so that those that are sleeping with their phone and they wake up and all of a sudden their balance is $100, they need to do something about it so they can manage their finances appropriately. That's a huge opportunity. And it also allows us to look at our customer from an end-to-end basis. It's not just about a credit card or a debit card. It's about payments. That's the relationship that we have with our customers. We're applying that in every one of the products and services that we had. We introduced our intuitive investor business or product for our wealth platform in November. We introduced.
Is this what other people call robo-advisory?
That's correct. And what is it doing? It's providing our customers with a more efficient way, right, to select Jim, right? If they want Jim in principle to manage their finances, that's great. Let's give them all kinds of different ways to manage their finances. Another way we're doing that is, how many people in this country or in this room have gotten a mortgage before? Right? Is it one of the most painless experiences you've ever had in your life? Right? You just enjoy it. And what's the thing that you dislike the most? Right?
Having to sign your name 7,000 times.
We ask you for information that we should already know about.
That's true.
Right? So what are we doing? Right? We've completely changed that. You're a Wells Fargo customer. You apply for a mortgage today. Right? We pre-populate the entire application. Now there may be some few things that might be new. Right? So you do that. What happens? The experience is so much better. We introduced that. We piloted last year, introduced in the first quarter. Now 10%, in March, 10% of all of our applications right, are that. We're now going to apply that to non-customers by using artificial intelligence, by using APIs. There's so many exciting applications to what we're talking about. We got to embrace it. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it.
Tim, drill down for this sophisticated financial audience and audience of leaders, how your team went about developing that product. I'm curious to know, the size of, how many, not specifically, but generally how many developers it took, how expensive it was, how long it took.
Well, first it was my idea. I'm kidding. Thankfully it wasn't, which is why we got it done. Yeah. So that's interesting. When we look at introducing new products and services at Wells Fargo, historically, the way that we did it is we said, you know what, we're going to develop everything about this, and we don't need any help from anybody else. And that worked for a while. But when you want to move quickly and you want to make sure that you have the best minds on something, sometimes they're not all working at your company. Right? And so the mortgage application example is a good one, and that is we looked at how long it was going to take for us to do it. Then we looked outside the company and said, are there other firms in the industry that are doing something similar, and we ended up partnering with a firm called Blend Labs. We made an investment in the company.
Blend
Labs, yeah,
Uh-huh.
they're actually located in San Francisco, great people. And we thought that was the better way to do it. We're absolutely open to inventing things ourselves and making those improvements, of which we do a lot, partnering, making investments, you name it. Whoever has the best idea, we want to be working with that person or that firm to be able to deliver that experience with our customer.
I think Tim said something that's very general in its application to business, which is if you're faced with a disruption like robo-advisor, there's two possible responses. Either you pretend it's not there and get disrupted, or you do what Wells have done, which is embrace it, use it, and actually the robo-advisor could be something that makes a Wells Fargo advisor even more effective looking forward. And I think it's important businesses recognize that distinction.
Please, Julie.
Yeah, and I'd say two other things is you'll notice everything Tim said was about it was about an outcome and a challenge. It starts there, and a lot of companies would say, well, where do you get started? You say, well, what's your biggest challenge and what's your biggest opportunity? And then drive your technology strategy and the opportunities. And the other piece was this idea of speed. So as we look at our own industry in terms of consulting, where we see that industry being completely disruptive, and what we're now, as we look at what we're doing, is this idea of speed, that companies can't afford to, have a big strategy, spend a lot of time and studying. They need to move much, much faster. And so we've built an innovation network around the US where we're doing labs. So we had a company come to us recently say, we think we want to do a virtual concierge. They had a bunch of rental products. They wanted to compete with hotels. Well, in the old day, there'd have been a big study, and they'd have gone out to consumers, and instead we said, okay, fine. And in 2 weeks, with 3 developers, we built a minimally viable product. And guess what? When they saw it, they were like, you know what? This is actually not going to work. It's not going to be personal enough. Now, the next step could have been testing it, right? But it's a very different mindset. Oil and gas, field, we just did some really disruptive work in maintaining wells. And we did it with the company where they said, look, we have something called, we call it the milk run, right? You send a guy out and he goes to the same route, checks every well. That doesn't seem like a smart answer. We did 3 8-week sprints, working with people in the operations, building minimally viable products, testing it to getting to something that's now being rolled out across the US and eventually the globe. In the old days, that would have taken a year, right? And not been as effective. But there was a willingness to experiment. You've got to be able to experiment and say, hey, it doesn't make sense. And then you also have to be saying you're going to work very differently. So I think that, but that's a cultural change for large companies.
I want to tweak the conversation a little bit. I want to start with you, Georgie, from the concept of speed to timing. And so what I mean by that is, craft beers have been popular for a while now. For each large company, the question isn't so much should we innovate, but when. When exactly in the cycle? Is it the moment we see something happening but we haven't validated it yet, or do we wait for validation? How do you and your companies think about that?
Just to mention something, we're global companies now. So here in the U.S., everything is happening. Everything's changing very fast. That's nice for us in a way because we can see what's going to happen, the rest of the world, but it's not happening as fast. In Africa, which has 1 billion people, we'll have 2 billion people in 25 years. Young population, hot climate. I mean, beer is going to be very big, and we're going to be able to learn everything we're learning here and eventually do it in Africa. China's a big growing market also. So you have some time to do things. When Kraft took us by surprise, we had just come into the U.S. We had just bought Anheuser-Busch, and then Kraft came in and it really surprised us, and it took us a little while to react like that. And,
Excuse me, how do you mean Kraft surprised you? In what way?
We like I said, we were stuck in our way of the solid brand, and that's going to be important. And then all of a sudden, these new things come in, and we went to restaurants. We went to a board meeting at a restaurant, and there are 200 Kraft beer brands in the restaurant, none of ours, and things like that. So it surprised us, but yeah, well, we reacted. We've bought 20 craft companies.
Yeah.
We've taken some guys on board, so we're learning. We're learning a lot from them in the international markets. We won't be surprised. And so if any craft beer appears in Argentina or Brazil and it looks good, we'll buy it
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah.
And so, so we...
That's exactly the balance I
Yeah.
was getting at on timing. And similarly, Tim, I don't think Wells Fargo was the first big company to launch a robo-advisory.
No.
So talk about that timing, if you would.
Well, I think that in that situation, I think we were a little bit slow, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And I think
so you're saying not on purpose.
not on purpose. I think, and the reason for that is that our advising business, Wells Fargo Advisors, was so successful and so profitable that it didn't seem like we needed to change as quickly as we should have. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the last few years is that you need to say, look, that's all well and good, right? But just assume that that's going to change, and it's going to change tomorrow. What would you do? Right? It may mean that you do nothing, right? But or it may mean you say, you know what, we need to develop competing products that might have a lower margin, but that's what our customers, our clients want. It's got to be turned around so it's less about what we think makes the most sense and what our customers and clients are telling us. And as Julie mentioned in her opening remarks, the expectations, particularly of the millennial generation and younger, are so much different in terms of how quickly something needs to happen, right? They want it yesterday. Well, sometimes the products and services that we provide to them are complicated, right? And so you've got to think differently about how you deliver those products and services. But I view this as one of the most exciting times in business history because there's so much opportunity out there. And even though sometimes big companies are criticized because they're slow and they don't move as fast, they also generate a tremendous amount to invest in an appropriate way. And one of the things that we've learned at Wells Fargo over the last few years is that we've got to be organized differently. Right? So we've completely reorganized the company to be able to take advantage of innovation, artificial intelligence, big data, and you need to bring new people onto the platform that have different set of skills that weren't on the platform 5-10 years ago.
Give us a quick example of reorganization that has worked.
So when historically the way we were organized in our retail banking business is that we were organized by product, by checking accounts, by credit card, by debit card, and so on and so forth. Except that's not how our customers think about us. They think about the relationship on a consumer side with Wells Fargo as being a payment relationship. So what do? We combined all those businesses together under one leader, Avid Mostabai. On innovation, we had innovation that was really exciting in each one of our businesses, but we said we weren't moving fast enough and we weren't prioritizing things as well as we could, and we weren't thinking about our customers on an end-to-end basis, so we centralized all of our innovation activities. The pace of innovation at Wells Fargo has doubled, if not tripled, over the last few years because of that change.
Good. Jim, would you pick up on the global aspect of this that Georgie began, because you run a global business?
Yep. I think that if you look at innovation globally, George's comments actually, beer is remarkably similar to asset management in one respect, which is ideas from different countries do tend to translate and tend to translate over relatively short periods of time. But if I can go on to the pace of change, which you've been touching on, I think this is what's qualitatively different now about most past periods. We've seen in a very short period of time automation, social media, communications, not only making businesses more efficient, that's good, but putting quite a lot of people out of work, that's bad.
Yeah.
So what do leaders do about this? Yeah. If there are less jobs particularly for certain sorts of people, white people without a college education, they used to dominate the workforce and they don't anymore. And that's why they have been the people voting for populists on both sides of the Atlantic. But the real trouble here is technology is not going to stop, and job patterns will change. As a leader, the important thing here is to help your people develop and help them develop so their skills are still relevant. In discussions like this, I find it a little disturbing that business people will say the answer is education, and then they breathe a sigh of relief and say that's government's problem. That's not true. Government's not going to fix it. Business has an obligation to develop its people, work through the skills, and make sure that people can, as far as possible, stay relevant in a changing economy. I think that's a very important call to action for business.
I want each of you to comment on that, Julie, if you would, on reskilling.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a very sobering statistic that we looked at in the fall was that investments in artificial intelligence by businesses had increased 70%, and the same executives, only 3% of them said they were going to invest in reskilling. And to Jim's point, a lot of that reskilling is going to have to come from employers and including in partnership. And so I look at us, over an 18-month period, we automated 18,000 jobs. We reinvested 60% of the savings in upskilling and didn't fire anyone. And by the way, had the strategy up front, because the way we were able to move at speed was we asked our people to help us identify where to automate. But the strategy really needs to include for companies, an investment in reskilling. Not everyone's going to make the journey, but it is really important, and the statistics are sobering. Well, at the same time, I'm with a lot of companies at the Business Roundtable and elsewhere who are investing, but if you really look broadly, it's not enough.
Tim, please.
Yeah, I would agree. And in fact, Julie mentioned the Business Roundtable. We've got a partnership that's developing at the Business Roundtable to go out to community colleges, to high schools, to colleges and say, look, these are the types of skills that we need, as opposed to just waiting and hoping they get developed. Not that our schools and universities aren't doing a great job, but as businesses, let's be more proactive in setting expectations of what we need, and not only what we need today, but what we need 5 years and 10 years from now. So I think it's got to be company specific, it's got to be industry specific, but then it's got to be companies across various industries. For example, we need more help in cybersecurity. You need more help in cybersecurity. Everybody does, right? So why don't we ask our schools to improve the quality of education for those skills?
Now, you know, this may be too sort of philosophical, but I think I'm curious how the Business Roundtable thinks about, let's say, what percentage of the problem the Business Roundtable, as a metaphor, can solve, right? So because businesses don't employ everyone, schools don't educate everyone. In other words, you said it's not only government's responsibility, but I'll flip the question around to any of you. Isn't it also government's responsibility? And now this is a U.S. phenomenon, but if people don't have the skills they need, they're being failed at multiple levels, including the government, including employers.
I think there are different solutions out there. I don't think it's just a US problem. The populism, anti-immigrant populism, anti-trade populism is very strong in France and Germany, and it led to the Brexit vote. So Europe has the same phenomenon of displaced people feeling angry. And they feel angry in part because, I believe, the reason for their displacement and for their lack of good jobs and prospects isn't the foreigner, the trade, the immigrants. It's actually technology. And that's why reskilling is so important. I think the politicians are in a phase of denial right now on both sides of the Atlantic. But I think that at some point they will have to get on to, I mean, maybe things have to get pretty bad before politics moves. But at some point, I think education has to get back on the agenda in a much stronger way. But in the meantime, business can't stand idly by.
Yeah, so I sit on the board of the Business Roundtable, and we've just kicked off an initiative to this point around the balance, is that as companies, as Tim said, we're working together, we're going out. Accenture is helping lead in Chicago. I know you guys are doing it, a whole network of apprenticeships. So to Jim's point, we're acting now, but we've we're working to set what we call an innovation agenda that's going to be very clear about the places where, as a country, we need a different strategy. And one of them is around education, because there isn't actually enough discussion and framing of the discussion and the concept of technology. There's a lot of dystopian conversations around it,
Yep.
but actually not a strategy around what we're going to do and how the government and the private sector are going to work together to do that.
Are you? How optimistic are you that something concrete will happen? It reminds me of the old Stephen Wright joke that everyone complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it.
I can't speak for whether we will get Congress and everyone to move yet, but big step forward to actually, I think, get this on the table in a different way. But from the companies, and Tim can comment, I'm very optimistic. I mean, in Chicago alone, it was myself and Greg Case at Aon. We said, we're both doing this stuff. What should we do it? And in 2 months, we had 32 companies signed up to, we're creating apprenticeship in a box and trying to shave it. It was very easy because people see the issue and they see it both as a talent gap, but also a real sense of corporate responsibility and where things are going. So I'm very optimistic. Tim, I don't know how you feel.
Oh, I am. I mean, it's early stages, and we're not going to solve all the education problems in the United States. I mean, one of the challenges we have is that we have education decisions in the United States are done locally, not nationally, no matter how, and so there's not going to be a
Right.
one-size-fits-all kind of solution to this. But I think it's a start, and I think we as employers, particularly large employers, have an obligation. The way that we think about it at Wells Fargo is we know we can't be successful in the communities unless the communities that we do business in are successful. It just makes sense to help out.
Yeah. Georgia, I listened to this conversation about worker training and reskilling, and if you'll forgive me, it sounds very expensive to me, especially in a low margin business. How do you think about it?
Oh, I think people are the most important asset that you have in a company. So we've always been very focused on training people, giving young people an opportunity, and we hardly hire from the outside. Most of the people come in through our trainee programs like that. So we're very focused on people, and we track the fast runners carefully. We follow them. We see what they need. And we're adjusting to new needs. We need new kind of people, much more in data analytics and things like that, which is different from what we needed before. We have also been very conscious of giving the right incentives and the right signs to the people. So our participation as board members is really making sure that we have the right incentives to the right kind of people that we want, and give them, and attract them so that they keep coming up and like that. So we're very, very focused on people. Expense with people is not where we cut expenses. I mean.
And you're speaking right now about the operating companies, not about 3G itself.
Yes. Well, 3G is 20 people.
That's what I was sitting here wondering just that. 20 people.
20 people. So that
Control the world with 20 people.
Very impressive.
So,
there's some different places I want to take the conversation, but let me pause right there and ask if there's anywhere where you do. I see a hand right there, and I was asked to give the mic runners more time than I just gave them. So please stand up, and somebody will find you with a mic. Maybe, if not, here it comes. Yeah, right there. And just please tell us who you are. Thank you. No, here comes the mic. Here it is. We want to record it.
Hi, I'm Seth Kaller, and I appreciated Julie's comment about electricity and AI, but it worries me how easily accepted the idea was that we don't need to worry about electricity. And just 2 quick points. I was coming back.
That's my fault, not hers, but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was coming back from Massachusetts after a storm, and for about an hour we were driving with no lights around, and we realized that it wasn't just the lights, but the gas stations weren't working, because the gas stations were all powered by electricity, not by gas.
Yeah.
So given that little experience, or given what happened in Puerto Rico and our underinvestment in infrastructure, how much should we be investing in the things that we're not worrying about because we just expect that electricity is,
Yeah.
is here.
The basic infrastructure versus highfalutin things like artificial
Land
intelligence.
and water.
Well, it's a couple things because they're not really separate, right? Because a lot of the investment actually to fuel, we have a big business in the utilities, is to better use these technologies to create more resilient networks, to have more predictive and prescriptive help into those networks. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you lived in the Northeast just a couple of weeks ago, 100,000 people at least out for a week. And so it is an issue, and it's an issue also around security. I mean, we're already looking ahead at what we call post-quantum, right? So when quantum computing comes in and it's even more fast, and then what that does for our critical infrastructure with the security risks. So I think at our peril, do we not look at our critical infrastructure and continue to invest? But I think it's not an alternative. In fact, technology is going to be part of where I think we can get more reliable networks.
Please.
At the beginning,
I'm sorry, please introduce yourself here.
I'm Jatrice Martel Gator, and I'm from Volunteers of America, an affordable housing builder across the country. In the beginning of this, you've made a statement about how everything must work with culture, workforce, and all of that. Now, my question is about AI. Only 12% of the people on the planet have white skin and are white. In AI, a lot of the prejudices and mythology of the people who are programming them has been inculcated into how they are focused and structured. Another thing is that some AI has found to be flawed because it does not detect brown skin. For instance, facial recognition. Even in some of the bathrooms where you wash your hands, the water will not turn on for you if you have anything but white skin. Now, speaking to the issue which was profound that you made in the beginning, of all these adjustments we must make in order to have a continued sustainable society and workforce in this country, are we correcting these things that we have already found out about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, thank you.
It's a really important point, and in fact, when we advise clients and we say, it's sort of, how do you approach it? One of the key strategies is what we call responsible AI. In other words, artificial intelligence can't be simply owned by the business units. It's not only a C-suite imperative. It has to be infused from the beginning with standards and ethics, not only about job displacement, but for exactly this issue. And so what we're seeing is the companies who are very serious about this are building from the beginning, so designing into their strategy how they will ensure responsible AI with ethics and testing. And the good news is, there are clear ways and methodologies to do that. It's really about choosing to do it and designing it into your strategy.
And if I could just, I'm sorry, Jim,
Sorry.
please. Nope, please.
The real answer to your question, which is a really important one, is something that's been part of leadership for decades, the importance of diversity. If businesses don't have gender and racial diversity at the senior levels, they will actually fail. And you gave a very good example of how lack of racial diversity can lead to failing systems. So I love the example, and I think it goes back to our truism of leadership, which is to try to ensure diverse teams.
Please, in front.
Thank you. Major Ken Tarr from the United States Marine Corps. My question is about leadership. When we talked about innovation briefly, I'm really interested because a lot of the innovation that you, Adam, you've written on about Uber, we talked about Snapchat, a couple other innovatives like Warby Parker are millennials. And there's this stigma that millennials won't work for companies long unless they get benefits and move up very quickly. So my question is, how do you foster innovation? We just had Admiral Stavridis, who was the NATO commander for several years, talking about innovation for our generation. So how do we foster that innovation in that generation of the millennials and try to keep them a part of us?
Thank you for that.
Right. So first, thank you for your service. Second, I don't think millennials are really that much different than baby boomers, right? It's just they're more active describing how different they are. We have five, and again, I speak from a little bit of experience. We have 5 in the Sloan family. And I actually think they want exactly what I wanted, right? They want it at a different time in a different way, and that's all well and good. I mean, I've been at Wells Fargo for 30 years, a baby boomer, right? But I've had about 16 different jobs, right? And I think the key is to make sure that you're hiring the right folks that believe in the mission of your company, right? And if you can connect those two, right, then you're going to be fine as long as you're continuing to be focused, as everybody on the panel has said, and that is that people are the most valuable assets we all have, right? You can't treat them like a number. They're not an FTE, right? They're not an employee. We call them team members at Wells Fargo. So when you foster that kind of environment, but you also make sure that they understand, right, that they don't get to be CEO after a year, right? The way to be a good lender, and we're very proud of the fact that we provide more credit to anybody than any other bank in this country, is you make a lot of mistakes. Well, how do you learn to make a lot of mistakes and survive? You do it over a long time because you can only make really tiny mistakes, right?
But Tim, is it a fact that, I think almost everyone on this stage has been with their employer for a relatively long time, some of us a very long time. Is it a fact that those days are over? No matter what other, no matter what else you said, it appears that young people do not want to stay at the same company for a long time.
I disagree with that, because when I look at, again, I'm speaking from Wells Fargo. Julie, you'll probably have better stats for the entire, but when I look at turnover at the millennial levels, it's not that much different than it is 5 years and 10 years. There's always that period of time in everybody's career where they start out and they realize, you know what, I don't really like what I'm doing. That tends to happen when you're younger, right? As you age, you find that what your passion might be. But one of the great things about our company today, and most large companies today, is we have 2x the types of jobs or 3x the types of jobs that we had when I started. So
more opportunity.
That's exactly right. So when we hire people at Wells Fargo, I say to them, look, we're going to invest so much money in you. We want you to have a long career at our company. But if you are any day you wake up and say, you know what, I'm just not happy with what I'm doing, raise your hand. Let's talk about it. Maybe we can find something else.
Over here, please.
Hi, my name's Seema Shah. I'm Principal Global Investors. So I'm not going to target my question straight at Jim because it'll be uncomfortable. Just firstly, in response to the question about millennials, I just about qualify as a millennial. And one of the things about keeping millennials in a job is feeling that they have a strong voice, an important voice, which I think in the future, given we're talking about the age of disruption in technology, our voices will probably be more and more important because we will help you recognize those changes and push forward. But my question really was, when it comes to government spending into education, teaching in schools, AI, like coding, those kinds of things, the US is probably one of the countries that spends the least. And that's significantly compared to Asia, but even in Europe spends a lot more. So if you look out over the next few decades, how do you feel US companies will be able to compete on a global scale if the people in the US are not getting that education, whereas in Asia and Europe they are?
Firstly, Seema, on the millennial and development issue, I think this is a special case of the importance of having a culture that challenges people and lets them develop. Whether it's millennials or baby boomers, if you let them get stale in a job and don't stimulate and challenge them, they will go, and they'll be right to go. So we need to have organizations that are culturally ready to give people a challenge. In terms of the question about STEM education, it's not quite so simple that the US is lagging. If you really looked at the high end of technology education, the US is the best in the world. And I do think that that's a great asset that helps us develop leadership in those industries. That's why the world's top tech companies are basically, apart from the Chinese ones, they're American. And that innovative culture, I think, comes from an excellence in education in part of the system. The problem that I think we have in US education, it doesn't give a fair deal to the masses. And I think that's a really serious problem. And it will take time to fix for all the reasons we know about how slow politicians are to do things. But I do think business has to help its people develop, and I think that's something we can creatively and appropriately do right now. So I think that's part of the answer.
Thank you. Back there, please.
Hi, Steve Gray, It seems that the AI and the high-tech piece of this came as almost like a war cry against unskilled labor, high wages, and pushing that down on businesses. It seems to me that if we get that shift that out of the war mode and into we want to retrain you and help you.
You're suggesting that we've gotten the tone wrong in the debate.
I came in with the wrong tone into this room, and it's really been helpful.
Oh, interesting.
But I think that my colleagues are really concerned about, well, what if they just legislate high wages and then we have to respond, and now it's,
Anybody want to take a step, Jim?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that it is very important to look at the potential solutions and to identify the problem correctly to start with. And I think a lot of the political debate is very sour and very inaccurate in terms of its diagnoses. So I do think that you're right, that the positive agenda has to spread. There never has been a period of innovation, including job disruption, that permanently led to less jobs being available. It just hasn't happened, even though there have been similar bouts of job losses to automation in the past. I don't think it needs to happen this time, but we maybe need better public policy and better actions by companies than we're currently seeing to make it turn out well.
It's worth pointing out that at the beginning of these cycles, it always looks like this. It always looks like there's going to be a net loss of jobs.
That's true.
We have the word leadership in the title of our talk, and Tim, I want to end with you. And we joked about you being admirable that you came. You've been very forthright of talking about the challenges that Wells Fargo has, and this is the ultimate example of leadership, I think, being the CEO in a situation. Would you? I think the best way to ask it with the short time that we have left is give us your report card on yourself and on Wells Fargo. How far along are you on working through the challenges that you've had to confront as CEO, and when will it be over?
Well, we're very far along. So I've been in this role for about 18 months. I was very clear that we were going to look at all of the products and policies, procedures that we had within the company and make sure that we were doing things in an appropriate way. And I was very clear that we're going to be very transparent about it. Unfortunately, when that occurs, you get some negative headlines, and that's been a bit of a challenge. There's no question about that. But in terms of the progress that we've made, we've addressed the concerns of our customers in terms of making things right for them. As I mentioned, we're fixing anything that needs to be fixed, and then we're moving forward. So, I think we're very far along in the evolution of the company, but I think one of the things that we learned going through this period of time, because it was 5 years ago that we were the most valuable financial institution in the world, right? And you know what? When that happens to you, you think about things a little bit differently, and you don't raise the bar high enough for yourselves. You don't say, what do we need to do to change? And that's a really important lesson that we have learned. That will never again happen at Wells Fargo, right? Because you always need to assume that tomorrow is going to be a little bit different. Somebody's going to have a little bit better idea. Your competition is going to be a little bit smarter, and you can't rest on your laurels as much as we did. But I would tell you that the two things that have gotten me through this period of time more than any is, again, that we have got the best team in the industry. But one is you have to have a sense of resiliency, right? You can't assume that everything's going to be good and magically things are going to change. You got to be very resilient, right? I look at some of the faces here, particularly from the members of the military. I think that's one of the traits that you guys exemplify more than any of us in the room, is that ability to be resilient. And then secondly, it's a sense of optimism for your company. Right? If you don't fundamentally believe in what you're doing and that you can do it better and that you can be more successful, then you shouldn't be the leader of a company. So those two are probably the ones that have been most important to me.
Do you but you said you're very far along.
Yeah.
As an outsider looking in, I wonder if you feel like regulators and the press and even competitors are piling on. Does that concern you, or can you not afford to think that way?
Well, Adam, in all deference, I think the media tends to be very good at piling on because it's pretty.
No offense taken. We build them up and then we knock them down.
Well, but your business has been completely disrupted, right? You don't have time, the time that you had 5 years ago and 10 years ago, to really investigate an issue. So you have, one new headline, and then you repeat the same story again and again and again because your margins are lower. I get that, right? But that's just part of the.
That's
right?
totally fair.
No, that's right.
Totally fair.
No, that's fair. Now I know you. You're different, right?
I like to
Right.
think so.
Yeah, not necessarily better or worse, just different. but in all, I think that the media tends to be about 6 months behind reality, and that's fine.
Yep. I want to thank each of you for sharing your very interesting thoughts, and for all of you for being such a good audience. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Julie.
Great to meet you, George.